going to rank the least to the most reliable vehicle manufacturers of 2026 according to the latest survey results. J.D. Powers ranks these vehicles based on the number of issues they have out of 100 vehicles. Obviously, the lower the number, the better. More means multiple trips to the dealer and possibly costly exchanges. I'm going to share some of the key issues that you're going to find with some of these vehicles, and hopefully this helps you go out there armed with the decision and the information to make the right choice on your next new car purchase. Let's get into it now. With the industry average being about 204 problems per 100 vehicles, you're going to expect on average about 2 problems per vehicle. That's right, you buy a new vehicle and you might visit the dealer unexpectedly for a couple little issues. With the vast majority of these seem to be technology related. But let's start with the worst of the worst, and that's Volkswagen. When we say the industry average is 204, Volkswagen ranks at 301. In other words, about 3 problems per vehicle you can expect. And those range, of course, from transmission issues. The outgoing Taos has had issues with the dual clutch. Now they've retrofitted that to automatics. But recalls are the game. Electronic tech failures, and of course, even catastrophic engine failures. Volkswagen has not been short on recalls, problems, technology overload, and honestly, generally don't carry the highest level of durability. It's gone a long ways from the old days of the people's vehicle. Keeping it simple is the name of the game. The more complex you go, the more problems you're going to experience. The next one in line is Volvo with about 296 problems per 100 vehicles. In other words, again, almost 3 problems per vehicle. And Volvo is struggling because they use turbocharging, supercharging, hybrid tech, and they use almost everything they can throw at it underneath the hood with a 4-cylinder engine. These engines are strained and the technology is further advanced with issues with the tire pressure monitoring system not using conventional sensors or pedestrian warning systems, and all of the technology related to a lot of the ADAS systems means that Volvo is on tech overload. So they clearly have their own issues to deal with. The next one should be of no shock, with Land Rover ranking at 274 problems per 100 vehicles. Now with Land Rover, essentially the British manufacturer ultimately owned by Tata Motors, who signs the checks, have been nothing new with complex technology, complex drivetrains, issues we go back a few years with timing chains piling up on some of their old 5-liter supercharged V8s. Now they're moving into the world of borrowing BMW's twin-turbo V8s, and even some of their Ingenium engines have had nothing short of issues with fuel leaks, oil consumption. I mean, whoever thought wires could possibly leak oil? Well, if that's possible, Land Rover might just be the first manufacturer to figure out how to do that. Heavy complexity, expensive repairs and maintenance, and by the time 3-4 years rolls up and people are ready to unload it, they're scared and terrified of that $3,000-$4,000 annual service, they're sent down the road. The problem is expensive, complex vehicles with high level of technology often means the 3rd, 4th owners just end up neglecting them, which just compounds things even worse. The next one on the list is Jeep. With 267 problems per 100 vehicles, the Wrangler 4xe, the Jeep Grand Cherokee 4xe with the sand in the engine, residual issues there, the park outside orders because of the potential catastrophic burn down. They don't want to take down a house and have more issues with lawsuits around that. Jeep in general has never been really that well built in my own personal experience. Now, I like the older TJs. I had one, but that was from a time when they had the inline 4-liter with a manual. It was as simple as it could get, but things are just getting too complex and they're trying to compete with the luxury cars from the likes of BMW and Audi, and in doing so, all that tech is in there, but the R&D and the quality isn't necessarily where it needs to be. So of course, with recalls and electrical gremlins, Jeep definitely has their share in their hands full. The next one in line is Audi, and Audi sits about 244 problems per 100 vehicles. Now another product of VAG, so it should be no surprise when we hear Volkswagen at the bottom of the list, VAG, and of course Audi. You know, Audi is sharing a lot of parts from the parts bin from Volkswagen, and Audi, of course, is just a more complex version of that. Now, they have things going on their side with the RS3s and the TTRSs and the Turbo 5s, where some of their more durable engines, but then their base 4-cylinder turbos, not so much. And EA 888 engines have never really been the sweet spot. Now, I know some people say the latest generation are much better, but they've still been a problematic engine. Light-duty suspension and brakes often means premature failures and repairs around that, strange noises, technical issues. Audi has their hands full. Mercedes-Benz is the next one online with 235 problems per 100 vehicles, and hey, I'll be the first to admit, I've owned a few Benzes, and from what I can see, the latest generations are more complex. They're using smaller engines that are working harder, direct fuel injection, turbocharging, and my 2018 C300 has been nothing short of problematic. Sure, it starts every morning and it runs and it honestly does everything we ask it to, but between body parts falling off, between electrical gremlins, between fault codes popping up on the dash every once in a while, strange noises, rolling rotational noises, and taillights filling up with water, and there's more and more technology buried in these modern day Benzes, means that at 235 problems per 100 vehicles, you're probably going to experience multiple visits to the dealer with a Benz. I know I sure did. Another one in line is Infiniti. 233 problems per 100 vehicles according to JD Powers, and let's be honest, the big brother, the luxury variant of Nissan, which we know have had nothing short of issues. Now the Infiniti, if you go with the larger Q80s and the bigger SUVs, you're probably okay. The outgoing V8s were good. The new incoming twin turbo V6s aren't bad either with a torque converter, but when you go into the smaller SUVs like the Q55s and all of that little widgety vehicles that are often shared overlap with a lot of the Nissan products where they're using the CVT transmissions and in some cases variable compression engines, which instead of a connecting rod, they're using a series of links, and it just adds another layer of complexity that just nobody wanted, nobody needs, and honestly, it's just costly. And they haven't been the most reliable with 233 problems per 100 vehicles. That's been an Infiniti affliction. Acura, sadly, it burns me to the core because I love Acura as a brand, which is the upscale version of Honda. They're basically shoulder to shoulder with Infiniti, also at 233 problems per 100 vehicles. But Acura, sadly, has had problems with sensors. A lot of the problems are electronic based. Transmissions have always been a problem too, with some of the Acura, specifically with the MDX, and of course with the CVT transmissions in some of the lower trim level vehicles, as well as the 1.5 liter turbo 4s. They've had a problem too with oil and fuel dilution, and some people say that the problem's been gone away with, administrative changes, different oil services, and some reprogramming. But let's be honest, it's still piston rings, it's still too much pressure from the fuel injectors, and at the end of the day, it's still a problem. Don't forget the 3.5 liter V6. I love the engine, but unfortunately there's been too many to not mention with rod bearing issues, and there's been a significant number of recalls related to that V6. Moving on, GMC. Hey, how do we not get through a list without GMC being here somewhere? 229 problems per 100 vehicles for GMC, and a lot of the problems stem really from the 6.2 liter V8s that we're finding in the GM and the Chevy pickup trucks, sadly, are a big nemesis. With polishing issues, crank polishing issues, rod bearing inconsistencies on some of the crank finishing, and third-party suppliers haven't necessarily lived up to the expectation. Of course, EPA has said many times over that a big part of the expectation of the fleet management of all of these OEMs is to reduce emissions and reduce fuel consumption. And in doing that, the addition of thinner water-type oil has been one of the contributing factors. So thin oil means that a lot of the 6.2s and the L87s have been a major issues. It's been nothing short of problematic. There's been a few electrical gremlins along the way too, and GMC makes the list. Ford's the next one in line. Let's be honest. Found on road dead, this is essentially the recall king at 228 problems per 100 vehicles. Half of the problems you're coming in for with Fords are related to getting a recall updated. We're also talking about problems with cam phasers, turbos, direct fuel injection. Now, granted, the 3.5 EcoBoost V6 has been one of their better drivetrains, but with wet belts buried under the hood of many of their vehicles, they have had their share of problems. Recalls, recalls, recalls. Remember on the EcoBoost 2.7 and 3.0s with the intake valves that were breaking heads off? That's another issue. So there's been nothing short of challenges. Ford's been dealing with that. Now they're trying to be innovative, and sometimes pushing innovation pushes your hand and forces the issues. Another one is Lincoln. With 217 problems per 100 vehicles, it's a Ford. So you're going to expect very much. And it doesn't surprise me to see it's on the back of the Ford product. With Lincoln, Aviator, one of my favorite vehicles from the brand, but generally it's just sort of the gray hair special, doing more of what Ford does. Now Ram, of course, I've got an old 2003 Ram and it still starts and runs and goes, but the newer Rams have been slightly problematic. You know, some of their Hemi tick issues with their 5.7s, and now they're transitioning into turbocharged Hurricane inline 6s. They've had some problems. A lot have been electronic gremlins, transmission issues. Even though now ZF 8-speed has been vastly better and improved, there still seems to be a plethora of issues with Ram trucks. At 216 problems per 100 vehicles, not the worst. By no means, and they are getting better. They are certainly further down the list. Next in line is Honda. This burns me to the core because I had a Honda Civic and I loved it. It was a 2012, and basically it's probably arguably the best of the best torque converter NA 4-cylinder, and from a time when Honda truly built durable engines that were long lasting. But with 1.5s, the turbo oil and fuel dilution issues, and the 3.5 and the crank issues and the bearings that we're hearing in the Ridge lines and some of their other products in the Odysseys, they're sharing the same issues that Acura is. And 211 problems per 100 vehicles ensures that Honda is no longer close to the top of the list when 7 or 8 years ago they were, but they're not anymore. Next one in line is Mazda with 210 problems per 100 vehicles, and I like Mazda. But what drops Mazda down a little bit is not their 2.5 NA 4-cylinder engines, because those are bulletproof engines, or the 2.5 turbocharged in the GTs. No, those aren't bad, other than some of those can use a little bit of fuel. The technology is a little bit simpler in Mazdas, so they're a very underrated vehicle. But they have had problems stalling and lack of restart on some of their issues with some of their bigger SUVs. And the technology, specifically with the hybrid, has had a few issues and a few dealer expectations. Now, overall, it's a pretty reliable brand and one I would highly recommend these days over many other brands, but they're not perfect. Well, here we are. Mitsubishi, 208 problems per 100 vehicles. With 208, you're almost barely over the industry average, but you know what? It's a simple vehicle. If there was more tech buried in there, chances are you'd probably have a few more issues, but because it's such a simple vehicle, it just lacks all of the potential failure points. So the next one, of course, is Genesis, which is the luxury upscale of Hyundai and Kia and all of those great manufacturers, with 208 problems per 100 vehicles, and Genesis has had their share of issues as well, but overall, basically industry average. And again, as I've mentioned, the average is 204, but Hyundai is now the next one in line at 198 problems per 100 vehicles. Hyundai is actually getting better. They're improving, but boy, they want nothing to do with their old Theta 2 engines that they've seen from, anywhere from 5 to 10 years back. The next one in line, according to JD Power, is BMW. 198 problems per 100 vehicles. Now, BMW generally has been getting vastly better. B58 with their inline 6 has come vastly better over any predecessors in the 6 cylinders from BMW. Their B48, which is their 4-cylinder, which is the best in the industry for a 2-liter turbo in the luxury car segment. They still carry a twin turbo V8 in many of their models, the 50 series, and of course many of the M vehicles like the M5s, M6s, and beyond. Those do add a layer of complexity, which do bring and introduce more problems. Of course, now they're moving into hybrids, they're moving into electrification, and that brings more complex issues, more questions by the owners and buyers. And honestly, things like simple like window regulators and backup cameras have all been little nickel and dime issues, and the complexity of the V8s mean that BMW could be closer to the top if it was exclusively their 6 and 4 cylinders, but it's not. They have other things they're trying. The next in line is Nissan at 194 problems per 100 vehicles. Now, I struggle with Nissan. They used to be a great brand from a great time. I had a 280ZX, 300ZX. Some of their old trucks were great. The Titans were even pretty solid. And even the Frontier now with the 3.8 is probably one of the few Nissans I would actually consider buying. I mean, with variable compression engines, now we're hearing almost 500,000 vehicles being recalled because of catastrophic engine failures. Who needs that? CVT transmissions failing, costing $6,000 to $8,000. So at the end of the day, Nissan's had their share of problems. They need to get back down to brass tacks, toss the CVT, bring in a good reliable torque converter, get rid of the VC engines, bring some NA engines and some reliable turbo engines, and you watch they could start slotting themselves up. They also need to innovate a little bit more as the model lineup's getting a little stale, old, and simple. They really do need to step up their game. Kia in the next in line is 109 93 problems per 100 vehicles, very similar to Hyundai, with the Theta 2 issues still flogging and blogging them down. Get around the Theta 2, their later model vehicles have been improved. The next one in line is Toyota with 185 problems per 100 vehicles. I've said this before and I'll say it again. Toyota is no longer what the brand it used to be. A large part of that is the V35A, that new 3.4 V6 that's turbo, direct injected, and full of issues because of particulate in the engine, allegedly. Now, I don't want to hammer on Toyota too much because overall it is still a pretty robust brand. You know, when they stick with what they know, and some of their NA 4-cylinder engines have been solid. It's unfortunate they're pretty much gotten rid of all of their naturally aspirated V6s, which were their bread and butter. And because they've eliminated the V6s and they're introducing more Turbo 4s and more hybrid drives, that's slotting them down. Now, on top of it, with the big issues with that V6, it just basically means Toyota is struggling right now. And 185 problems per 100 vehicles means you're probably not out of the woods. Even the latest Camry has issues with recalls related to the inverter issues and their hybrid drive. So that being said, Toyota is not at the top of the list. The next one on line, though, moving up the list, is Porsche at 182 problems per 100 vehicles. Now, great brand, but very expensive. You're going to pay the piper if you want to drive a Porsche. 911 exclusively expensive. Caymans and Boxsters and Macans and Cayennes are all great vehicles. Some are much more complex than others, but they are a pretty durable vehicle. You will pay a lot of money for maintenance, but you're going to get a vehicle that feels well put together. Honestly, I just bought a second generation Porsche Cayenne. I've got a 2018 sitting on the driveway. I love that vehicle. It's been absolutely amazing so far, and I can attest to the durability that far exceeds what we're seeing in a lot of the competition from Mercedes and Audi and Benz. They can't hold a candle to Porsche, but at 182 problems per 100 vehicles, they're not perfect. They have their issues too. Next in line is Subaru at 181. CVTs, reprogramming, you know, they've had head gasket issues. They've had problems with some of their older EJ engines. They have gotten a bit better. Most people don't drive Subarus all that hard, but I truly believe if you stress them and work them hard like a Porsche, they would buckle and break down like a cheap suit. 181 problems per 100 vehicles is where Subaru sits. Chevy in the next in line, 178 problems. Again, I've already mentioned some of the bearing issues, some of the 6.2s and the L87s. This is just ditto with GM. Next one, Cadillac at 175 problems per 100 vehicles. Very similar. Also carrying some of the same engines as the GM and Chevy products, and some of those are carrying through to Cadillac. Next one in line is Mini at 168 problems per 100 vehicles. Mini is a spin-off of BMW. What can you say? Now, they have gotten better. They used to be a real dog. They used to be problematic. They used to have real issues with their engines and oil burning, timing change, transmissions, leaks. Oh man, I could go on. But guess what? In around 2014, the Mini adopted the B48 engine, or a variant of it, which is BMW's most reliable engine in their lineup right now. So with that, they also adopted better gearboxes. They essentially improved the reliability that they used to have. A 2010 Mini is not the same as a 2020 Mini, not even close. Late model Minis are far better, far more reliable, and more worked out. The bugs are gone, and generally a pretty robust vehicle. They're not cheap and they're not perfect, but they're actually pretty close. The next one in line is Buick at 160 problems per 100 vehicles. Means Buick, how? Not sure. It's a GM product. It's just the particular drivetrains, transmissions that they're utilizing. I'm still not a big fan of some of the Turbo 3s they're using. They're buzzy, they're whiny, they're strained. But honestly, stick with the larger vehicles and you're better off. And the top pop on our list for most reliable and least problematic vehicle, according to JD Powers, is Lexus. And there's a big reason. Lexus still carries their most reliable engine, that naturally aspirated 3.5-liter V6 engine. Toyota's not using it anymore, but Lexus still carries it in the IS350 for yet another year. That's one of the most robust engines ever. They also have a variety of different drivetrains, but unfortunately, Lexus still suffers from the same problems with the V35A, that twin turbo 3.4, but the difference is there's less of those vehicles because they're found in the LX600, which don't sell in big numbers, and the GX550, which also sell in fewer numbers. So the influence of the bad engines has a much lower number of influences in terms of the overall numbers. Instead, they use 2.5s, made it up to some of their hybrid drives, and those are a common engine, very reliable. So Lexus at 151 problems per 100 vehicles means they are certainly the top pop. With all of that said, please do drop a line. I'd like to hear more of your thoughts if you agree with these numbers. Do any of these surprise you? And if so, how? Check out a couple of great videos there. They're going to take you down the path. Definitely would help out the channel a lot if you do that. Talk to each and every one of you real soon, everybody. Have a great day. Bye-bye.